What is happening, everybody? In this video, I'm going to be doing a tutorial for how to use the contest generator in the MMA Sims here over at Stokastic. If you find this content helpful, like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you're somebody who's totally new to our tools, this is going to be a good overview of how it is that all of the different functions of our Sims tool works. And if you're somebody who's been here before, there might have been some updates to the tool since you last looked at them. So here's a breakdown of how to utilize all those tools. If you have additional questions, if you are a Stokastic sub, our Discord is always open and you could ask any questions within there or leave a question down below in the YouTube chat. But let's go ahead here, and where everything starts is on the contest generator. We've got a couple of different packages, our core package and our max package. The core package allows you to build up to 1,000 lineups in the contest generator. The max package allows you to build up to 10,000 lineups. And what you want to be selecting here is a pool size that most closely matches the contest that you're playing in. So if you're playing a smaller field single entry contest that maybe only has 500 or 1,000 entries, that's where you'd be selecting the 500 or 1,000. If you're playing in the large field GPPs that typically pay out 100,000 first for MMA DFS contests, you'd select 10,000. But if you are somebody who's just on a core package and maybe you play 1, 2, 3 lineups, just want to throw them into the large field contest, there's no issue if you're on the core package. You're still going to get better lineups than you otherwise would be building by building out the 1,000 lineups. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be selecting the 10,000. Now, other things in here that you want to make sure you have selected: the right site. So if you're playing on DraftKings, select DraftKings. If you're playing on FanDuel, select FanDuel. And then also make sure you have the right slate selected. As far as fight stacks, this is going to be defaulted to not have any stacked fights in your player pool. I very rarely do make stacks. However, if you did want to, you could go in here and you could force the contest generator to build lineups for you that have stacked fights. And then when the slate gets simulated out, it will identify if those lineups are actually good or not. In general, though, for just about every single slate, I'm not stacking any fights. So after all these selections are done, you can press generate lineups. Now, a couple of other things on screen here, which are going to be helpful for you. If you look here, projections last updated, ownership last updated, that's just a timestamp to let you know the last times that projections and or ownership were updated. For MMA, it doesn't really matter a ton, but it's helpful for a sport like NBA where there's regular projections updates and news is changing things all the time. But it's good just for your own knowledge to know when the projections ownership were last updated. Now, what's actually happening in these lineups that are being built out, which is 10,000 of them, is this is supposed to be lineups that are going to mirror an actual contest for this slate. So the lineups that come out from here, it's not going to be the actual simulated lineups or what are the best lineups. Where we start here is by building a pool of lineups that's expected to emulate the field. So when we are simulating the contest after this, we're simulating the actual contest itself, including the lineups that we're expecting the field to play. And that's why when you look here, you'll see ownership and pool exposure. So ownership is what our projected ownership is for all of the fighters. So you see here, we've got Amanda Hebos for this slate, projected for 47.9% ownership. The pool exposure, 48.6%. And the difference is just the difference between the two. You want these to match for the purpose of getting the most accurate simulations possible. Where you would want to change this, it's not if you want to have more or less of a fighter. That'll be later on in this process. If you make any changes here, it's because you disagree with our ownership projections and you think they should be different. So let's say you think Amanda Hebos is going to be more popular than 48.6%. Well, then you could give her up boost arrows. And then when you regenerate lineups, it'll make her more popular in those lineups. You can do the inverse as well. If you think Amanda Hebos is going to be less than 48.6% owned, you could give her down boost arrows here in terms of ownership and then rebuild lineups, and it'll rebuild lineups with less of Amanda Hebos in it. But once again, you only want to do that if you actually think there's a reason that the ownership projection should be changed. You do not do this to change the amount of exposure you get to fighters, because if you did something like Amanda Hebos is in 48.6% of the lineups by the field, but if you then said that you want to have less of Amanda Hebos and you lower her ownership, what you're actually doing is you're making the Sims think that Amanda Hebos is going to be less owned for this contest. And as a result of that, you're probably going to end up with more of her because she's going to start to look under-owned if you drastically reduced her amount of pool exposure. But assuming that you don't have any issues with any of the ownership here, the next button you're going to press is Simulate Lineups. Now, on this page, there's a few things you're going to want to be doing. Once again, just make sure the right site is selected, the right slate, but then also percentage to first. So percentage to first, this is really simple. What percentage of first for the contest are you simulating? Does it pay out to first relative to the total prize pool? So if you're playing in a contest that has a $400,000 prize pool and there's 100,000 to first, you would select 25%. One thing that's different about our percentage to first selections relative to the last time I recorded one of these videos is we've added in a lot more different selections in here. So a lot more payout structures have been added to our Sims. So you can now go to every single 5% interval all the way up to 40%. And that should cover just about all of the contests. So typically around 30 or 35% is the percentage payout for the main slate over on DraftKings. But always make sure to check the contest, what the total prize pool is, and what of it is going to first place. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to select 30%. Now down here, you will see the salary of all the fighters, our projected fantasy points, the value in here, which is just the salary relative to what the fantasy point projection is, and the ownership. Now, if you're just using our projections, you could go run contest simulation and you could simulate out the slate. However, you could also alter some of these. Let's say that you think Amanda Hebos should be projected for less fantasy points. You could change this. You could change it to whatever you want. You could put her in for 80. And then if you're uncomfortable with that, you could roll it back. If you want to put her in for more, you could type in whatever you want. If you just want to do a quick change to a fighter's projection, you could use the plus and minus arrows. For every plus you give, they're going to be projected for one more fantasy point. For every minus you give, they'll be projected for one less fantasy point. If you have your own projections, you could upload them here as well. Super simple to do. Just create a CSV, one column that says player name, another column that says projection, and another column that says ownership. And then if you upload that right here and then press upload, all of these numbers would change based on what your projections are for the fighters. And that would also be taken into account when you run the simulations. But if you are just using our projections, or if you've made other alterations and you're ready to run the sim, then the next button you press is Run Contest Simulation. Now, what's happening here is all of the lineups that were built out in the contest generator, those 10,000 lineups that are built to mimic what the field is expected to do, they're all playing against each other. The slate is currently being simulated 40,000 times, and this is on what's considered a play-by-play basis. These are play-by-play sims. So everything that would potentially happen in a fight, takedowns, strikes, knockout, submission, that is all being taken into account here. And all of these lineups are playing against each other 40,000 times, with all those fights being simulated 40,000 times. And then all of those lineups are going to be ranked based on the ROI of those lineups. And the way the ROI is figured out is across all of these simulations, what was the average payout that those lineups had individually when they all played against each other in a tournament setting. And that's why the percentage to first is going to matter, because if you have 5% selected to first or 30% selected to first, that creates different payout structures for the contest. And that would change how different lineups rank. So lineups that maybe have a really high ceiling, but are also pretty contrarian, that could be a lineup that does better in a contest that has a really top-heavy payout, but it might not be as necessary in a contest as a flatter payout. So that's why you always want to make sure you have the correct percentage to first selected. Now, you see here that our simulation is done being run, and all of the lineups here are now sorted by simulated ROI. And once again, the simulated ROI, this is the average return each of those lineups had across all of the sims. So our top projected lineup in here, it has an average ROI of 234.1% in all those simulations we ran. And you'll also see in here, so the simulated ROI, projected fantasy points, the ownership sum, which is just the projected ownership of all the fighters combined in that lineup, win percentage. This is how often in the simulations that lineup ended up winning. Top 10, that's the percentage of time that the lineup ended up in the top 10. And the cash percentage, the percentage of time the lineup ended up cashing. Now, keep in mind, the reason that this number isn't going to be like 60, 70, 80% cash rate, typically in GPPs, it's around 18% of lineups end up cashing. So it's very rare they're going to have a lineup that's expected to cash in a GPP payout like 60 or 70% of the time or anything like that. And then also dupes. This doesn't matter for a lot of sports, but it matters a ton for MMA, because I'm sure, as you guys have seen, if you're familiar with MMA DFS, there's oftentimes in slates where there could be a 30, 40, even up to hundreds of lineups tying, and that is going to impact the expected ROI of lineups. So if you sort here by dupes, you will see the lineups that are expected to be duped the most in this particular slate. And that is also taken into account into the simulated ROI, because if a lineup wins, but it's duped 15 times, well, then the payout for that lineup, it's lesser than a lineup that isn't expected to be duped at all. So this is a really useful part of the Sims. Actually, I think maybe even the most valuable part of the MMA Sims is finding lineups that have high upside, but also aren't expected to be heavily duped by the field. Now, after you've looked at some of this data, you do just want to select lineups by simulated ROI, at least to get the best overall results per what our Sims are. So what you do in here is quick favorite and then favorite the amount of lineups it is that you want to be playing. So if you're playing 150, select 150, favoring 20, you can favorite 20. Or if you have a custom amount, you could put favorite custom amount and you could enter in a very specific, maybe like 27, if that's what you're playing on a slate, and it'll favor your top 27 lineups. Another newer feature that was not available the last time that I had made one of these tutorials is we now have a uniques button in here. So if you want to have your lineups a little bit more diversified, you could make changes in here and say 2 uniques or 3 uniques, and that will make it so that none of your lineups have all of the same spots in them except for a couple of fighters. So you might have a lineup that has 5 of 6 of the same fighters and 2 ones that are compared to each other. But if you were to set 2 uniques, then every single lineup that you favor has to have at least 2 unique fighters in it. It'll just diversify your lineups a little bit if that is something that's of interest to you. Sometimes people want to know how they diversify their lineups. This is a way to do it. You don't have to do it, but it is definitely something that some people like to do. For the purpose of this, I'm going to select favorite top 150 lineups. Now, what a lot of you might be thinking at this point is, okay, here's how the Sims do the legwork for me, but how do you make customizations based on inputs that you might like? Outside of just altering projections, there are ways that you could change the projection or the ownership projections that you're getting to fighters here. And there's a couple of different ways you could do this. You could set exposure caps. So in this set of lineups, you'll see of our top 150 lineups, we have 67% of Amanda Hebos. If you don't want, say, more than 50% of her, you could put 50% in here. You could press set exposures and adjust favorites. And now what's going to happen is you will not get more than 50% of Amanda Hebos in your lineup. So you look here, now at our lineups, we have 50% of Amanda Hebos, because what happens is we're favoriting 150 lineups. Once we have 75 top lineups favored with Amanda Hebos, the Sims will just stop selecting Amanda Hebos lineups. And that's a way that you could force the Sims to cap the amount of exposure you have to a fighter. And then you could always change this back as well. Now, if there's just individual fighters that you want to change or get more of, another thing you could do here is the ROI boost. Now, I went to the exposure page, and what you could see on this page is just some general data on the fighters, what the average Sim ROI was across all the lineups they were in, projected fantasy points, their expected ownership, the exposure you have, and then the leverage. So leverage is going to be the difference between the exposure you have and the projected ownership. But if you want to, say, get more of a fighter, or if there's maybe not a specific number you have in mind of a fighter, let's say you just want less of Amanda Hebos, but you don't need it to be like exactly 50%. We could go in here. You could just say negative 10% ROI boost. And then if you go to the lineups page, every single lineup that has Amanda Hebos in it now is projected for 10% less Sim ROI. So what that'll do is if you unfavorite your top lineups and then refavorite your top 150, this will get you to less of Amanda Hebos, just because we've downgraded every lineup in the Sims that has her in it. So you'll see now that instead of having the 66 or 67% of Hebos we had before, it's now 58.7%. And then you could also change this back at any point in time, whenever you want to. And it works the inverse way as well. So let's say you wanted to have more of an individual fighter. Let's just pick a random one out here. Let's say you want more of Jacoby Smith. We could go in here, let's say, give him a 20% ROI boost. Now, every single lineup that has him in it has been boosted by 20%. And then whenever you do boosts, you do have to unfavorite your top lineups and then refavorite them. But you could do a bunch of boosts at once. You don't have to do them one at a time. But you'll see here that after I boosted Jacoby Smith, he's now showing up in 43.3% of lineups as opposed to the number that we had before. Now, also within here, if you guys want to, You could also go and do ROI boost, like I said, to as many fighters as you want. So if you wanted to go Jacoby Smith 20%, but then maybe you want to up Thiago Moises, you want to downgrade Uros Medic, downgrade Mackenzie Dern, boost ROIs, you'll see that lineups will have these sim ROIs, and they're going to be stacked on top of each other as well. So it'll make it to the top lineups that you are favoriting are also going to take into account some of your own personal preferences if there's fighters that you just personally like more or less based on whatever exposures you are getting to them. Now, one other thing that we've added from the last time I recorded this video that is really, really useful for me, particularly in NBA DFS, is our entry manager. So what you could do in here is upload your CSV of lineups directly from DraftKings or FanDuel, whatever site you're playing at. And then when you've got your top lineup selected, all you have to do here is just press this plus button here. And my top 150 lineups have now been put directly into this contest. And then you just download the entry file, upload that to DraftKings or FanDuel or wherever it is that you're playing, and those lineups are going to be updated right away. So you don't have to download your lineup file and copy and paste and save it and then re-upload it. Not that that's a super painstaking process or anything like that, but a lot of people did request that we have some sort of entry manager. So this will make it so you don't have to manually edit your CSVs in any way. You can do it directly within our Sims tool now. So if you guys are looking to sign up for these tools, link is down below in the YouTube description box. If you are going to be going to our site, you go right through there. It'll show you the different options, and you can go through and see what it is that has been included in the different packages. So if you don't know what each individual package has, like the core package, the max package, you can see right from our sign up page the different features within each package. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and let me know if you have any questions below. Good luck this year.